It is September 19th, 1944, and the setting sun highlights what's left of the town of Arnhem. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost takes cover as the sound of a strafing Messerschmitt cuts through the constant rain of screaming artillery shells. He and his men have defended the town for 3 days now, and there still hasn't been any sign of relief from Allied forces. By this point, they are beginning to run out of defensible positions and supplies. But the sound of petrol engines snaps Frost's eyes to the bridge's southern end, desperately scanning through the turmoil. As the clamor grows louder, he looks in vain for any sign of British tanks. When he sees none, his heart sinks. Realizing the sounds are coming from the opposite end of the bridge, a group of British airborne soldiers holler as German tanks round a corner, guns thundering. No one is coming to save Frost and his men. For the rest of the night, they will fight for survival alone. Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. In today's video, we'll be covering the Battle of Arnhem, one of the most heroic defensive actions fought by the Allies during the Second World War. Trapped inside the town for almost 4 days, the men of the British 1st Airborne Division 2nd Battalion endured countless assaults from an overwhelming superior enemy force. Even after it was clear that their situation was hopeless, the brave paratroopers continued to hold out, only surrendering when their positions were completely overrun and their very last bullets had been fired. Supporting our sponsors is the best way to support our channel. Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace provides you with a comprehensive suite of easy-to-use tools for building and maintaining a website or domain tailored to the audience of your choice. Management is made easy through access to integrated analytics and sharing buttons, which allow you to broadcast yourself to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and other social media platforms. With access to all of these features and more, it's never been easier to establish and market your online presence. Squarespace isn't just for business, though. It also supports individual content creators and small communities looking to create a professionalized website for private use. So head on over to squarespace.com/armchairhistorian and start your free trial today. And when you're ready to launch, use code ARMCHAIR to save 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain. The battle for Arnhem was part of the greater Operation Market Garden, the Allied scheme to circumvent Axis defenses in the Netherlands by way of a massive airborne operation. Such operations were often planned, but rarely executed due to their immense logistical complexity and high risk of casualties. But when faced with the heavily defended Siegfried Line, Allied planners under Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery finally decided to greenlight their next parachute assault operation. Numerous British, American, and Polish airborne divisions, totaling 35,000 men, would be deployed to seize a line of bridges along Highway 69 in order to open a route into Germany and the rest of the Netherlands. These divisions were required to hold their positions for a maximum of 3 days, while the British 30th Corps swept north to reinforce them. Unfortunately for the battalions of the 1st British Airborne Division, planning for their targets north of the Rhine River was flawed from the start. A desire to preserve Allied air power resulted in selecting too few aircraft to carry the entire fighting force in one day. Only half of the 1st Division would be landing on the first day of the operation, with the rest of the airdrops staggered over the following days. To make matters worse, German forces in the area had successfully made Allied command overestimate how much anti-air artillery was north of the Rhine. This caused the Allies to select landing zones much further away from their actual targets. Each battalion had to walk up to 8 miles or 13 kilometers before even reaching their targets and mounting attacks. Even worse, men had to be left behind to defend the landing zones for the next day's drops. Despite these limitations, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd battalions landed successfully on the morning of September 17th. German artillery and redeployments immediately engaged the 1st and 3rd battalions, causing them to halt their advances toward the town. While neither would manage to reach Arnhem itself, they did manage to kill General Kusen, the commandant of Arnhem, before being forced to fall back. As for the 2nd Battalion, they were the only British force to proceed to Arnhem. The only delay they suffered was the gratitude of the Dutch civilians they passed, many of whom cheered on the British troops. Upon reaching the railroad bridge south of Oosterbeek later that day, their good spirits were dashed by the sight of German engineers demolishing the crossing, eliminating any hope of assaulting their main objective, Arnhem Bridge, from the south as planned. The 2nd Battalion's commander, Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, quickly adapted in order to continue the operation. An experienced paratrooper known for his boldness, Frost and the 2nd Battalion made it to the northern side of Arnhem by evening. Watching as the Germans there redeployed over the bridge to respond to the other landings, the 2nd Battalion avoided confrontation by sneaking through buildings and avoiding snipers, taking the area surrounding the bridge's northern end with little resistance. Fighting truly began as the paratroopers assaulted the fortified German guards manning the bridge itself. As part of their assault, British flamethrowers struck an ammo and fuel depot, lighting much of the bridge on fire in a massive inferno. Satisfied with having at least secured a foothold, Frost ordered the 2nd Battalion to dig in. After encountering a few more German patrols, Frost described his surroundings as the fighting finally stopped for the night. The fires on the bridge lit up the whole area like daylight, and the heat from them made the bridge impassable for that night at any rate. Anyone attempting to move to the other side now would be silhouetted against the flames in a way that would turn such a gamble into suicide. Alone and no longer wielding the element of surprise, the 2nd Battalion faced a much larger German force as the morning of the 18th broke. Now organized and aware of what they were up against, the Germans resumed their assault when the 9th SS Reconnaissance Battalion tried to push across the bridge from the south. In their attempt, a number of armored cars punched through the British position before their 6-pound anti-tank guns could disable the rest. This bought time for the 9th SS Panzer Division to surround Arnhem, assaulting the north end of the bridge and taking up positions in overlooking homes and buildings. As the 2nd Battalion struggled to hold out, German mortars and artillery assisted the assault with constant shelling. Frost describes how close the defenders came to collapsing. Each hit seemed to pulverize the masonry, and the appalling crash of these missiles against our walls scared the daylights out of headquarters. Although they endured the onslaught, the 2nd Battalion ended the day in much worse shape than it had begun. With plenty of wounded and dwindling medical supplies, the beleaguered paratroopers continued to hold out for reinforcements that were still miles away. The Allied battalions outside of Arnhem continued attempting to press their way into the town as more airborne troops began to drop. Most that did so faced German opposition immediately and were forced to join the 11th, 1st, and 3rd Battalions in Oosterbeek for their own defense. German forces quickly besieged the town, trapping them inside and ensuring no relief reached Arnhem. On the 3rd day of fighting, the Germans decided to switch tactics. The arrival of German self-propelled artillery meant that most of the day was characterized by shelling and bombing rather than continuing to rush a fortified British battalion. By the afternoon, the Luftwaffe had begun strafing runs on houses occupied by Frost's forces, and the 9th Panzer Regiment had arrived at the northern end of town. Understanding the 2nd Battalion's dire situation better than he did, German commanders pressed the attack with a systematic approach. Throughout the night, Stug 3 assault guns dismantled the British position house by house with the assistance of artillery strikes and air support. And by the dawn of the 20th, much of Arnhem was in ruin. The British were nearly out of everything, from food and medical supplies to ammunition. Attempts to resupply the paratroopers had fallen into German hands, and communication was re-established only long enough to learn that all further Allied attempts to reach Arnhem were being abandoned. As if to accent the day, a mortar shell landed beside Frost and injured both of his legs, removing him from command. Fires razed what few structures the British had left to take cover in, including those being used as makeshift hospitals for the wounded. A 2-hour truce was brokered to evacuate the wounded British troops into German custody, including Frost himself. He recalled his displeasure in stark detail, stating, "We still could not believe that the 30th Corps would fail to come to our rescue. It was difficult to feel that there was enough genuine opposition to stop them. It was desperately disappointing, and having done everything we had been asked to do, we were now prisoners." The battle soon devolved into skirmishes as the British were dislodged from the bridge and took to hiding in what structures remained. Their last radio broadcast, heard by no one except the Germans, encapsulated the spirit of the day. Out of ammunition, God save the King. By the 21st, the Battle of Arnhem concluded as the German forces there cleared the bridge, enabling them to finally respond southward toward Nijmegen. Fighting continued at Oosterbeek thanks in great part to the arrival of the 1st Polish Parachute Brigade, who had managed to receive one of the few warnings from the 2nd Battalion about German positions and so changed landing zones. Between the relief they provided and the role they would play in protecting their allies during the upcoming evacuation south over the Rhine, the Polish paratroopers would carry on the 2nd Battalion's bravery in the coming days. Overall, the Battle of Arnhem was a failure for the British. Blame for the devastation was assigned almost immediately to the 1st Polish Parachute Brigade, whom the British described as having fought very badly at Arnhem, despite never once setting foot in the town. Cooperating with the wise advice of their very supportive British allies, the exiled Polish government saw to it that the 1st Brigade's commander was removed immediately. Despite its overall failure, Operation Market Garden did succeed in capturing and holding strategic locations south of the Rhine. This allowed the Allies to liberate much of the southern Netherlands before winter set in, and gave them a strong footing to launch renewed offensives the following spring. The rest of the country would be liberated as late as May of 1945. Lieutenant Colonel Frost would endure German custody for 7 months. In the years following the war, he became a legend among the British Army, much like the rest of the 2nd Battalion. Dropped hundreds of feet with little support well behind enemy lines, they had fought to the last man longer than expected, exemplifying the experiences of the paratroopers throughout the war. The missions that these soldiers undertook, successes and failures alike, were unlike any the world had ever seen. Thanks again to our sponsor, Squarespace, for making this video possible. Don't forget to click the link in the description below.